Hello everyone, it's your old pal, Timbo, knocking over all the shit on my desk. And today I'm going to be talking about this little piece of news regarding Steven Spielberg that has been popping up in my news feed a little bit lately. So Spielberg says, "I don't believe that films that are just given token qualifications in a couple of theaters for less than a week should qualify for the Academy Award nominations. Fewer and fewer filmmakers are going to struggle to raise money or to compete at Sundance and possibly get one of the specialty labels to release their films theatrically, and more of them are going to let the streaming video-on-demand businesses finance their films, maybe with the promise of a slight one-week theatrical window to qualify for awards. But in fact, once you commit to a television format, you are a TV movie." The focus seems to be on Netflix since they've been very non-compromising about their whole policy of doing the same-day theatrical release to qualify for awards while still being primarily distributed through Netflix. Regardless, you have Spielberg here saying that streaming platforms that are distributing movies, that those films should be counted as TV movies and should therefore be nominated for Emmys instead of Oscars. But I disagree with Spielberg's comment for a number of reasons. For one thing, I disagree that movies distributed on Netflix or distributed on streaming platforms in general count or should count as TV movies, or that it is a television format. Just because Netflix makes their own shows and is also known for, distributing television shows and streaming TV shows, I don't consider Netflix a television format. I think, if anything, when it comes to movies, Netflix and streaming platforms are closer to direct-to-video. Nothing about the form changes. For a TV movie, you usually have to, make room for commercials, etc., but nothing about the form changes. In a lot of cases, the production and distribution of the movie being distributed on Netflix are entirely separate. The only things that Netflix themselves really frequently gets into the business of financing the making of are documentaries and stand-up comedy specials. Most of the films they've been picking up already were made, but just needed distributors. And also, I think it's closer to direct-to-video in that it's kind of where Hollywood is dumping all of the shit that doesn't make money in theaters anymore, which was kind of what they ended up doing in the 90s and early 2000s with VHS and DVD. There were direct-to-video sequels of every fucking animated Disney movie ever. They really milked that, but I think the only reason that this is not getting milked as much is because there's not as much of a profit going to the studios if it's being streamed on Netflix. That's why I think sticking with this whole, doing the 2-week whatever qualifying theatrical release while keeping it on Netflix is perfectly fine and legitimate, because if anything, it's closer to direct-to-video than TV because it's just a different means of seeing the movie. There's nothing formally different about what you're watching. I mean, that's the reason why TV shows on Netflix and on Amazon are all eligible for the Emmys despite not ever being broadcast on television, because they're still shows. In form, they are still TV shows, even though a lot of conventions of television of traditional TV have been eschewed by shows that are being distributed on streaming platforms. The point is that in composition and in form, they are still TV shows, and so they still count for TV awards, even though it's just a different way of watching a show. I think it's no different with Netflix and movies. It's not a different kind of entertainment. It's not a different kind of art. It's still cinema. It's just non-traditionally distributed, but in form and in presentation, there's nothing different about it. And if it can get a qualifying release in theaters, I don't think that difference in distribution should make people's evaluation of it as a movie any different. People have no problem doing that with TV shows on Netflix. I don't know why we're all being so sacred cow about movies. In this age of kind of failing movie theaters, streaming platforms are increasingly becoming the, like, safe haven for independent creators, and even established creators that are just not huge box office draws. I mean, Spielberg, of all people, should know this. He almost had to sell Lincoln to HBO to get a profitable release, which, by the way, I think that being Spielberg's only real tango with streaming platforms and movies, with it being with HBO, might be what's making him be this way. I think he might be confused, because releasing a movie through HBO and releasing a movie through Netflix are very different, and I hope, even though they're mostly known as streaming platforms now, both of them, I hope we understand Netflix started as a DVD rental delivery company, and HBO has been a TV channel, albeit a premium one, since the 70s, so it is a TV movie then. Another big reason that I think classifying Netflix films as TV movies, because they mostly don't play in theaters, is stupid, is like, what's the difference between, let's say, a Netflix movie, a small indie movie is getting a Netflix release, and they want to qualify for awards, so they release it for a couple weeks in however many theaters in LA you need to be eligible for the Academy Awards. What's the difference between that and another equally small indie film that can't get much distribution, that spends all of its distribution cash on just 3 weeks playing in LA? Is the fact that it is only accessible in theaters the whole time of its run and not somewhere on the internet or on a streaming platform, does that make it more of a movie? Does that make it more legitimate? I would argue no, it doesn't. I don't think it does. You know, I don't want to use this word, this E word, too much, because it gets overused, I think, in a lot of contexts, but I think it's appropriate here. I think it's this obsession with the, like, exclusive element of movie theaters is what makes these positions sound elitist to people, is because, no, you know, even if, you know, the distribution in theaters is the same as any other movie, and it looks like a movie, it functions as a film, it's made by an established filmmaker, for all intents and purposes, it is a movie. But just 'cause it gets released on a streaming platform, it is now lesser, or at least different. And I would argue lesser, since you're saying that it should be excluded from awards, or excluded from some festivals. And while the Oscars has this theater requirement, how sacred is this distinction, really? Because I remember a couple years ago when O.J. Made in America, by all cases, a television documentary won the Oscar for documentary feature, despite being like 7 hours long and initially being broadcast on TV. And also, all the Academy voters watch all the movies they vote on fucking DVD screeners that they send to their house and not in theaters anyway. So, like, how much of a sacred cow is the movie theater genuinely? Netflix represents and is a profound change in how movies are accessed and how they're watched. And we can debate about whether it is a net positive or a negative change, and I think that depends a lot on what you value in the film industry, what you think is important about movies. But regardless, it is what's happening, and I think the industry would do well to embrace it. This is an age where art and entertainment is so nebulous and freewheeling. The entertainment landscape and the media landscape, all of the lines of division have been blurred. And this insistence on these rigid definitions of forms, I think, is ill-advised, and I think this penchant for sticking to tradition is going to end up costing mainstream Hollywood more than they're ready for. There are ways to integrate these new challenges to your industry. It doesn't just have to be pushing against it, because when you are pushing against something that is convenient and that most people like, and you are in the business of entertainment where ultimately people's opinions are what drive your revenue, you don't have much room to fight it, I don't think. And I think it's a bad business idea to do it, and I think in Spielberg's case, it's kind of artistically and intellectually dishonest as well. I don't agree with Spielberg that we should treat it like a TV movie, because that is not what it is. Netflix isn't television. Even though Netflix as a platform isn't television, it distributes television shows, which is why the television industry is okay with honoring them, and I think the film industry would do well to continue to do that with movies, because while Netflix is not, they are not a movie theater, they're not the traditional way to see movies, they're distributing movies, and they're following your rules. They're putting them in theaters when they think they have a chance. Nothing about the movie changes if you change whether or not it comes out on Netflix along with its 2-week theatrical release. There's nothing different about it. There's nothing different about the filmmaking. There's nothing that makes it not cinematic, and it's not on TV. What makes a TV movie is being on television. And the whole point of why Netflix is popular is because it is not television, but it still gives you TV shows and what you want. And that sounds like contradictory, but that's the media world we live in, where, again, these lines dividing these different media forms are not as rigid anymore. And I think our rules, if we're going to have them, about evaluating and honoring entertainment in this era should reflect that. So I'm going to stop ranting. I just wanted to say this. I wanted to get some thoughts out, something I've been thinking about. I think it's an interesting topic, and I am completely willing to be persuaded to the other side, but I think that movies on Netflix should be eligible for Oscars, and I think Steven Spielberg is being a big old dummy. So let me know in the comments. I'd love to have a nice spirited discussion about how Jews and feminists are actually the problem here, or whatever the fuck you idiots think. Or you can leave sane comments and I'll talk to you about those. Whatever you want, I'd like to know what you think about this, because it's an interesting conversation to have. I mean, we are in a new and different and kind of confusing and hard to define media landscape and entertainment landscape in a lot of ways. And it's going to be interesting to see how we navigate around those. Alright, that's it. I'm done. See ya.